to say right at the beginning.
Okay.
Try to lighten that whole thing up a little bit.
Press has treated me very nicely.
Well, you know, now you think of this as the doctoral oral exams. Good morning. Welcome to Newsmakers. Those of us in news tend to have very short memories. The unsolved problem today is much more interesting than the crisis overcome 5 or 10 years ago that puts today's problem in context. Lest we forget, at the beginning of this decade, the Cincinnati public schools were in crisis. Financially, they had to turn to the state for loans. More importantly, they had lost the confidence and support of the community. In the midst of that chaotic time, the business community, in the form of the Binger Commission, developed a plan to reform the Byzantine bureaucracy on 9th Street. And in 1991, the school board picked Michael Brandt, then the principal of Woodward High School, to implement the reforms. Last Wednesday, after 6 years as superintendent and 30 years in the system, Michael Brandt announced that he will retire at the end of July. Among all the things he said, one statement rang out particularly true.
This is the most high-stake job in the city, in my opinion, because we have the future of children. And whenever you put those issues on the table, it's going to have a huge emotional response from people.
We are going to devote all of Newsmakers this morning to the present and future of the superintendency of the Cincinnati Public Schools. I am joined first by retiring Superintendent Michael Brandt. One of the interesting twists on Mike's retirement announcement was that the public school offices are in the converted Mary Middle School, the very building in which Mike started teaching social studies in the fall of 1968. Welcome to Newsmakers again, Mike.
Thank you.
By the way, anybody who started teaching social studies in 1968, like I did at LaSalle High School, is okay with me.
Okay with you, huh?
But somebody who started in 1968 shouldn't be retiring in 1997.
One of the privileges.
Well, it's very good, and congratulations
Thank
on
you.
an excellent service to the city and to our
Thank you.
children.
Appreciate that.
Your term as superintendent will always be linked with the Binger Commission.
Correct.
Now, help us get some perspective. Was it that the Binger Commission, this group of business people and community leaders, came together and told the educational professionals things they really didn't know? Or was it that the school system, and at least some people in the school system, knew what had to be done, and they were looking for some borrowed authority from outside to move forward the bureaucracy, to move forward traditions that were stifling the system? What really was going on there?
Dan, if you remember, then Superintendent Leetta Powell and the board in 1989 had requested the CBC to make that study. They took over 200 volunteers, 2 years to go through the system. So the report was ready in 1991 for release. Some people thought it was very intrusive because I think the way it was released was such a shock to the public. If you remember, every channel carried it live at 10 in the morning. You had an embargo on it for at least a week, so people knew what was happening. You had 2-hour programs that evening after the national news. So it was sort of like a shock wave went through the community. Personally, as I was sitting there listening to those recommendations, I had been on the job 35 days. I was a bit stunned at the depth of the recommendations and how sweeping they were. But I've often said that while all the reforms were pointed towards getting our house in order, financially being stable, and getting more dollars to students, they really didn't intrude on the academic side. They basically looked at vocational education, but said that we're trying to get the reforms in place, get rid of the bloated bureaucracy, get your financial systems in place, get your systems work in place so that more dollars could go to the classroom.
You know, people for years, teachers, parents, had been saying too many people down at the central administration. What was different this time? Why was it that finally that log jam could be broken and some real change could take place?
Well, I think the magnitude of the report pointed out when they announced the Binger recommendations. If you remember, they had a large visual of the organizational chart behind
used a piece of that.
And what we did was actually went through then and analyzed what work needed to be done. And in our business, it seemed that every time a new piece of work came into the organization, it needed a new person to direct it. So we backed off and actually analyzed what needed to be done and considered people last. So we were able to cut almost 50% of the central bureaucracy and still move on and get our work accomplished.
Now, when you cut 50%, and that's the figure, two things about that. One, cutting that many people from the central bureaucracy, was there any sense of an adverse impact to the teacher in the classroom and to the student in the desk? Not other people, but to those two groups. Was there any sort of adverse impact from that huge cut?
I think the best way to answer that is that there was probably some unknowns to us at that time. But if you remember, we just didn't let the work drift. What we did was shifted it to the principals, the schools, and with the teachers union, we actually created new structures like curriculum councils and other types of structures that allowed more input and involvement and collaboration. So the work went on, and I would use textbook selection instead of central office administrators making it. The teachers actually had curriculum councils where they would help make those recommendations. So I don't think that the students saw any loss of service or that the teachers were overburdened. Principals, quite frankly, felt a bit overburdened in the beginning until we could adjust some of the workloads and make some of the adjustments at central office. But it was a bit chaotic at first just throughout the whole system, because you had, if you remember, we were offering voluntary resignation plans. People were making career decisions. So from an emotional point of view, it was just very difficult during that time.
One of the things coming out of the Binger Commission and sort of dogging the system ever since, in one sense, was the charge by some groups. I heard this a lot from mid-level administrators and from some principals I know and teachers and parents, that the business community had become too influential in running the schools policy-wise and on a day-to-day basis. What's your view of that? What about the balance? Did the business community become too influential?
I would always defend that notion of saying no. I felt that what the Binger Commission said was very simple. Here are the recommendations. They're sweeping. You may or may not have the expertise personally to me or in your organization to get these things done. We will not make recommendations and walk away. We will help support you through that. And at various times they've put teams together to come back into the district to assess either at our beckon and call to say how are we doing, or taking a look at how the recommendations were working out. And I have never felt, even though that was the rap from day one, that I was too close to the business community, that Ron Roberts was running the system, and that all of those things. I never felt that a day. They were there as key advisors. They were there as supporters. They were desperate to see the system be successful. They felt it was tied into the economic viability of the city. And I think that it's a model that when I talk to other superintendents around the country, they tell me they wish they had a business community that was well organized and supportive. But to some groups of people, that prevailing thought, no matter what you would offer in evidence, never went away.
Would it be fair to say that rather than saying that, in your mind, that the business community was too influential, that provided another balancing force to some other influences that maybe were too influential before?
Oh, I think that's true.
Okay. On this, given what you've just said about the business community and your tenure as superintendent, one of the things that you've been doing, and I presume you're going to continue to do, is teach in the education school at Xavier.
Right.
What does this say about the training of educational professionals, administrators? Is it that we need to change what's going on in the ed schools so they do know how, they have the management skills, they have the strategies, that they're familiar? Do they need really MBAs rather than masters in education to do what needs to be done in modern education?
There was a class I was teaching a couple weeks ago, and one of the students said it's about time that the education department talked to the business department and the management team. And I think that education today does need a drastic overhaul. The challenges are different, the skills that are needed are different. More systems are decentralizing. Finances have become so prevalent as a task to accomplish that I think that the innovative programs, the ones that will be successful, will start turning out a different quality principal and a different quality superintendent.
I'm way out of touch with what's going on in the universities and the ed schools these days. Is there really that spirit? My personal experience with those groups is that they were even less open to change than the people out on the front lines in the schools.
Well, I think what's going to happen is the marketplace will change them. I think if you look around, and we had an experience this year where we had over 20 principalships, and in some cases we were really struggling to get quality pools. Well, I think we put quality candidates in each school. To get 4 or 5 candidates to give a school a choice was very difficult. And principals are saying that they're burned out across America. They're saying that it's too much work, responsibility, pressure, stress. And I think this is going to be forcing the universities to take a good look at how they prepare. And the ones that aren't willing to change, I think they're going to lose their customer base very quickly.
Mike, we're going to have to move on in the second half of the show to the future, but with some other people. But I want to ask you, what is it that the next superintendent needs? What are the qualities that the next superintendent needs that maybe you weren't in your press conference the other day? You were very frank that you were able to accomplish some things, other things you weren't able to accomplish. What are the qualities that you think this district needs for the next 5, 7, 10 years?
Well, first of all, I think the superintendent is going to have to make sure that the various stakeholders that represent this community they're very much in touch with. It's a very diverse group, and there's many, many different groups that have interests in the Cincinnati Public Schools. Foremost, however, I think it's someone that can navigate the strategic plan and the plan that we're developing with the community for the facility master plan improvement. I think they're going to have great management skills, and they're going to have to be very knowledgeable about the curriculum issues that are inside the strategic plan.
Well, thank you very much for being with us this morning,
you.
and more importantly, thank you for the service that you've provided the children of this city.
It's been a real privilege.
Good luck.
Thank you.
Okay. The school board now faces the critical decision about who should replace Michael Brandt. Join me after the break when I will be joined by both the president and the president-elect of the Cincinnati Board of Education to find out the qualities they see as critical in Michael Brandt's successor. Thank you very much. Welcome back. No decision is more important for a Board of Education than the hiring of a superintendent. Over the last year, the board developed and adopted a strategic plan known as Students First. The board's commitment to that vision of the future will be the most important touchstone in the search for a new superintendent. To discuss the dynamics of that search, I am joined this morning by 2 people. Lynn Marmer is the current president of the Board of Education. Last weekend, President Clinton appointed Lynn as one of 20 members of a new National Assessment Governing Board, which will formulate voluntary standards in reading for 4th graders and mathematics for 8th graders. But that's a topic for future newsmakers. Art Hall is currently the vice president of the Board of Education, but will assume the presidency in January. From that position, Mr. Hall will be responsible for overseeing the search for a new superintendent. Welcome to Newsmakers.
Thank you.
Lynn, Michael Brandt's announcement that he was going to retire, maybe, at least it took me a little bit by surprise in the sense that it's a few months earlier than I knew some issues had to be dealt with. But obviously, members of the board knew that it was a possibility that you would be searching for a new superintendent in the coming year. Where does the process stand? How ready were you? What's already in place to set this search into process?
Well, we knew that there was a possibility that the superintendent might not want to continue. In addition, we felt that it was our responsibility as a board, as it is in any organization, to try and develop a succession plan. So this summer we spent a considerable amount of time working through the issue of developing a model of what a superintendent should be able to do, where the superintendent works both internally and externally. And so while we were certainly disappointed when Mike decided to retire, we were not caught completely unawares. We have a model that we want to now refine and make sure we feel comfortable with it. And then we want to take that model out into the community and make sure we're not missing anything and help have the community prioritize it, and then I think we'll be ready to search.
Art, what is that? When Lynn's talking about this model, what sort of things get factored into that model?
Well, it's a model of what we have determined the competencies or attributes
Okay.
of a good superintendent or a good leader is all about. So that consists of a number of, ability to lead, the ability to bring groups to consensus, the ability to manage the boundaries, manage the network, so to speak, to interface with all the various stakeholders and factions that are in the ability to effectively demonstrate leadership inside the organization itself. Those kind of qualities are among and there are many more.
Now, obviously, I don't. Michael Brandt has already announced his retirement. In that model, what would you say were his strengths, and what would you say are the things that the next superintendent maybe has to be stronger in? And he was very honest at his retirement announcement that there were things that he hadn't been able to accomplish that he wanted for the district. So I think we can be frank here. What are the things in that model that you're developing that may look both similar to or different than Michael Brandt?
Well, I think Mike was very strong in his externally in dealing with the public. He was excellent, and I think with the strategic plan being now the driving force in this system, that the kind of qualities we will look for, or at least it's all a matter of balancing, Dan.
Oh, I understand that.
The perfect person is never there.
Right.
So it isn't that.
And that's why, though, when you make a change, you often balance out
It's
what
a
you
waiting.
just hit.
It's right.
Lynn, do you have any insights into that, or anything that you would like to add to that in terms of what maybe are the higher priority qualities right now? Is it that internal leadership that Art was talking about?
I think that the person is going to have major responsibility for driving change within the system, and that does not exclude the hard work that also is done with the external constituencies, parents, teachers, the state, the federal government, all the interest groups that are interested in education as well.
Now, one of the things that I mentioned before was the strategic plan, students first, and you've mentioned it now. Is this what drives the change inside the system? Is this the roadmap?
I loved it. Art, when he was asked this question before, said, "We have a car, we're just looking for a driver." We are not looking for someone who needs to build their own car, if you will. The strategic plan was developed with the community, with teachers. It's based on our experience. It's already starting to show good results. So we do not see ourselves deviating from the strategic plan. And so therefore we are looking for a manager as opposed to a creator.
One of the great contributions by Mike's and his team was the development of that plan. That plan represents a lot of innovation, a lot of research, a lot of investigation, looking at good practices or successful practices, and so we've got that now. There's no reason to, that's the gift that they've given us.
Given that students first, you feel good about, you feel like it's the car that can drive the system to the future. Boy, that sounds like a presidential campaign someplace. Rather than a bridge, a car to the future. Anyway, developed by Michael Brandt and his team, the thing that's on I think a lot of people's mind right now, does that mean, because you're committed to this, that the tendency is to look inside, the tendency is to look to the people who put this together initially so that they will continue it?
No, I think that's an open question, because we're looking for the leadership, the kind of, the qualities of leadership that will implement this plan. And it may be, we're certainly not saying that those qualities don't exist inside the system, and we have to go outside to find them. So there isn't automatic transferal of the kind of skills that we're looking for versus those that it took to make that plan, to develop that plan.
Lynn, let me ask this question. Have you already decided one way or the other whether this is going to be a national search, which is the way that a lot of the news people are talking about it right now? Is this going to be a national search, or is that still a decision that has to be made?
It's still a decision that has to be made, although I have to say probably most board members have an opinion about it. My opinion is that we lose nothing by looking as broadly as possible, that if we decide we have an internal candidate then that confirms that, and if we find someone new from the outside, that may be a plus. But it's still a decision for the board to make, and we're still interested in what the community has to say about it. You know, as you started off, this is the most important decision the board makes.
So one of the things I want to be clear about, you were saying, as you, I think Lynn sketched this out initially, but you're developing this model which will then become the basis for the search. If I understood correctly, that before the search actually begins, you're going to take that model out to the community for input. Is that another step that's going to go on here?
Yes, absolutely, yeah.
And in what form? How will community have an opportunity to get input?
Well, the process for doing that has not been finalized yet, but we will develop what we think as a board is the model, and it will be prioritized and weighted, you know, and then we will then share that with the community and get their feedback.
What kind of time frame are we on?
I would expect that, and Lynn can help, I would expect that we would have the model ready to go by 4 years in.
Okay.
And
before the end of '97, within the next month.
Yeah,
And I think we envision having conversations with the community sometime in January, because we really need to be out in the marketplace by mid-February if we're going to do a national search, because of the timing of superintendents and the way this works.
And actually, by Mike deciding publicly to make this decision at this point, this has been good for the system, rather than having it take place March 1, for example, which would have put you behind the eight ball.
That's absolutely right.
Okay.
That's right.
One of the questions about the internal candidates is that, gee, there are certain things about the system, and everybody was very forthright the other day that still have not changed. We've changed the management structure. We've changed a lot about the principles, the building leadership, but everybody is still frustrated with the lack of progress with test scores and achievement models and all of that sort of thing. Is it that we're in a situation that in order to make the changes that will be necessary to change the way kids learn in this district, that we're going to have a different kind of leadership than already here? Is this kind of the same thing as the Binger Commission? You got to bring in a whole new way of looking at the world to shake things up? Anybody want to take that one on?
Well, I think the strategic plan really outlines what we need to do. Remember that what the strategic plan focuses on is improving student achievement, and it's really focused primarily on the neighborhood schools, which is where we have the vast majority of our children and where we need the most improvement. So I don't think this is the Binger Commission era in that it's a whole new approach.
I want to just push that a little bit farther, because as a parent who my children haven't gone through public schools, my frustration was not necessarily first and foremost with the central administration, although I thought it was bloated and needed to be cut and all that kind of stuff. My frustration was frequently on that classroom level, especially at the junior high and high school level. And you know, and as a former teacher myself, I'm not sure we don't need to really shake things up in a similar sort of way. And I just really wonder if that's easier for an outside person than an inside person who's lived their whole life or their whole career in this system.
That's a debate. I mean, that's a debatable issue. I'm not comfortable saying it's one or the other. I think if the right person is the right answer, or the best person is the right answer, and I certainly, in my mind at least, you know, that ability to shake things up is one of the requisites that I have for our superintendent. Now, whether that person can be, I mean, business organizations have found those people inside and found them outside.
That's true.
Yeah.
So, you know, we're trying to keep us open-minded about that as we possibly can.
But you have identified a key quality, which is that we're looking for a change agent. We're not looking for a manager of the status quo.
And that's an interesting thing, because on the one hand, you're looking for, as you said earlier, I think you're looking for somebody to manage this proposal, but in doing that, that person would be a change agent.
That we're looking for significant change in our schools over the period of the next 5 years. Schools will look dramatically different, and in fact have already started to look dramatically different. And the bottom line is improving the achievement for students.
So,
and I live by the principle that, you know, you manage things and you lead people. And you lead people by example, you know, and the kind of leadership I think we all share. That we want to see someone who exemplifies the qualities that we think will actually impact people and will cause people to change. And you begin that with yourself, with the leadership person.
Well, thank you very much for being here. This is a process that the whole community is really concerned about, and believe me, newsmakers will come back to this, and if one should be back on as this process develops. Thank you for being here this morning.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you, Dan.
And thank you for being with us. We end this morning with some scenes from a practice session at the School for the Creative and Performing Arts for their new production of Fame. The play continues at SCPA through December 6th, and tickets are available through Select a Seat, 721-1000. Enjoy.